Hey everybody, welcome back to another video here. Today what we're going to look at is arranging objects on your design. So you've imported all your images, you made your shape, you imported your images, and perhaps done your text and other images. So these are all the things I'm going to need to complete my sign or my project. I want to be able to arrange them now, and so that's what we're going to be looking at today. So one of the key things you're going to mess around with when you're doing arranging is your grid spacing. So just make sure that your grid spacing is appropriate for your drawing. Right now I just have it set at 1 inch. If you want to change it, it's up in Torchmate, General Preferences here, and then your grid size. So right now it's set for 1 inch, 1 inch, and we might change that later on, and I'll show you why we'll a time when we would change it here. Okay, so let's get started with, I've already got this text made. I've turned text to graphics. And now what I want to do is I want to center it in this area down over here. So the first thing I would do is I would take the two objects that this involves. So this would be considered one object. The sign itself is one object. So I've made a path on this. So I just took all the object and I hit Control H and that made a path. And my personal preference is to do that, to make paths as I go. So I could even make this into a path right now, Control H. It's not going to hurt it. That's for sure. And what I find is it just, things seem to react to each other better in the future. It's not necessary, but I just have better success with it. So I've made a path there. Again, this could be made into a path. So I'll just Control H that as well. It was grouped, but now it's an actual path. So the program kind of thinks of it as a separate entity. And that's how I want them to be considered right now until I put them all together. I don't like to move all of them in place and then just make one path and be done with it. I like to make path, break path continually while I'm working on the drawing. Sometimes I want it made, I'll make it, and sometimes I want to break it so I can move individual things around and I'll break it and then just remake it. So my recommendation again, make pass on everything and then let's put them in position here. So I've got my words and my sign and I want to center them. So I'm going to highlight those two objects. I'm going to go up to layout, and under layout you can just use the shortcut Control K. But this gives you several different options. Sign blank is a really good one to work with. If you want everything justified to the left, to the right, to the top, to the bottom, centered, etc., 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 here's all your various options. So basically just whatever it is you need, how you need to align your objects, this is where you'd want to come. I usually like to just use my Control K, so I would just go boosh, Control K, and there we have it. So now we have these two objects centered, but that's not really what I want. I don't want this perfectly centered. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower it. And when I lower it, I'm not going to use my mouse. Instead, what I'm going to do is just use the arrow on my keyboard. And by doing that, what's going to happen is it's going to ensure that I stay on that centered axis. As soon as I use my mouse and I try to drag it down, it's going to bounce all over the place. Having your snap to grid turned on helps with that, but it doesn't always mean that you're going to keep it perfectly straight, especially if you're doing it from a zoomed out position like this. It's very likely you move it over and it snaps to the next line over and it's not perfectly centered anymore. So if you just use your arrows though, you can center it, you can drop it up and down without adjusting it side to side at all. And here's another little tip. Whenever you're moving things around with the keyboard, when you're zoomed in, you can see how this is going to move when I press and hold the arrow. So we're going to move it an inch. And there we go. That's about how long it took to move it an inch. Now if I zoom out and I want to do the same thing, I want to move it an inch. You can see how much faster it moves when you're zoomed out. So the more you're zoomed in, the more precise you can move that. You can see how precisely I can move that. And sometimes you'll want to do that. And sometimes you won't want to waste your time. So it depends on what your end goal is here. Right now I just want to get this moving as quick as possible. So I want to center it in the space between here and here. I could sit here and I could count all of those. That is definitely one way to do it. Another way, you could make an object like this, stretch it out, and now if you look up in the top left corner right over here, you'll see the length of the object. So it's telling me that that's 23 inches between the ground to where the combine is and the edge of I guess the border of the project here. So I have 23 inches. I want to space that in. So if I wanted to center that, this Mike and Fran Fellner, I can do some math. I could just take 23 and divide that by 2. So I'd be left with 11 and a half. And now to get 11 and a half, once again, I could just make an object like that. Just go like so. Let's make that 11.5. And oh, sorry, no, that's not what I want to do. I want to take that object, I want to take my 23 and I want to subtract this from it. So let's just round it off, and right now it's at 8.37. So we could go 23 minus, and let's just do an 8 to keep it easy. So it'd be 15 then, and half of 15 would be 7.5. So that's my measurement I'd make for my box. And just make a little box here. Let's go 7.5. There we go, and I'll set that there. And now what I could do is I could bring this object down to that 7.5. And as we know, those numbers weren't perfect. So I could go and do some slight adjustment here. Split the difference. So now there's my 7.5 from the ground going to there. So what I would do is I would just split the difference of this. So I can see this, and with an object this large, no one's going to notice that it's an 1/8 inch closer to that ground than it is to there, or vice versa. But if you want to get it closer, it does matter. You can zoom in here, you could change, you could do the math again for how big this was and lay out another box to get it exactly where you want. I'm just going to eyeball it. In fact, I'll use my mouse here. So I want to move it down to about the halfway point. So the halfway between here and here. So I'll just move my mouse to that halfway point, approximate, and then I'll go to my keyboard. I'll just move my keyboard, and that should do it. So now that should have centered that for me vertically, that the distance here from the ground to the top of these letters is the same as the edge here to the bottom of those letters. And because I had it centered already, this distance here should be nicely centered as well. Okay, so that's one method of centering. I'm going to do another method with this guy over here. So I'm going to take this object. I think my grid snap is on. Yeah, it looks like my grid snap is on. It's snapped to the corner down here. I'm going to take this object and I want to center it again. So we could just do the good old count. So I've got 1, 2, 3 blocks. So that makes it a little bit tough. If I want it to be really accurate, I could get it to an even number. So I could go up to my Torchmate settings here, and I can go to general preferences, and let's change that to, we were at 3. Let's make this a 1/2 inch. And what that'll do is that'll give us 6 boxes instead of 3. There, so now you can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 boxes in between there. So we can get an even number with that, which means I want to move this up 1, 2, 3 boxes. There we go. So now that should center me. The tip of this, the highest point of this object, should be 3 blocks, so 1.5 inches from there, and the lowest point of the object should be 3 blocks, 1.5 inches from there. So once again, we can use our block counts to figure out how much we want to move this over here. And with weird objects where one part sticks out like that and another part, you don't necessarily need this balanced with that, but you would want this to balance with the other side if you're going to replicate the same object over there, which is what I am going to do. And this doesn't have to be a specific thing. Usually you can just make it wherever you wanted it to be. So we've got just 2 and maybe 2/3 of a block if you count that little section there. But more importantly, what I did is that time I used this snap point over here, and that'll make it easy to use an identical snap point on the other side. The other method we could use here, instead of trying to figure out what we'd want there, is we can use the placement. So using these numbers over here, I'm going to put this back to where it was, which, there we go. Okay, so I needed it to be, I don't think I have it in the perfect spot here. Let's try that again. There we go. So we need this to be, we already did the math, if you remember. We need it to go up 1.5 inches. So from this bottom left corner, that's what we're working in. When we look up here, we're going to go up 1.5 inches. So here's our vertical position. So I'm going to go 4. I'm going to change that to 5.5. There, now that gives me that equal centering up and down. And I'm going to bump it over. It's at the 18th position right now. So remember, it's counting from this over here, not from that spot. It's counting from this bottom left corner of the drawing, of the material. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bump it over, let's just go 2 inches. So then I just type in 20 here. That's too much. I don't like that, so let's go 19. And that's pretty good. Or maybe we'd want to go 19.5. Nope, I don't like it. Keeping it at 19. Okay, there's our 19. So in essence, I went in 2 inches from the outer point. I am down 1.5 inches from the top point. No, not 2 inches. 1 inch from the outer edge, and down 1.5 inches from there. Or if we want to look from here, we're up 1.5 inches from there. So we're up 1.5 inches, in 1 inch, and that's where I'm placing that. And that's going to be really helpful, especially if you're going to replicate an object like that. So we've done this in another video, so I won't spend too much time on it, but all I'm basically going to do is go Control D. I'm going to duplicate that object that I already have, and I'm going to reverse it just by flipping it over, because I think it'll look better if it's reversed than if you keep those the same way. And I'm going to try and get that as close to, oh, it's because my snap is on. I'm going to Control Z that. We're going to redo this without my snap. So what was happening there was, because my snap was on, it wouldn't let me adjust this to anything I wanted. It was following the grid lines. So we're going to just expand this now. So I want it at 100. Again, you get more accurate if you zoom in. That's pretty darn close. Okay, so there's that object. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it over here. Let's turn that snap back on. So I got my grid snap. Control W is back on. We're going to line it up. That should do the trick. Okay, and now we're going to move that object. So I selected the bottom right corner because we want to work from the bottom right corner of this thing. I want it to go up that 1.5 inches again, and I want it to go over, I forget what it was now, 1 inch. So I'm going to change 78 to 77. There we go. And by doing that, these two are identical. We also have equal spacing here on both of them and equal spacing here and there on both of them. Again, that's another way you could do it. You also could have just clicked on it, counted squares, and moved it over to wherever you wanted it to be to make that work as well. So there's duplicating, reversing, centering objects up. Another thing that you're most likely going to have to do is you're going to have to go and put some holes in it. So now that I'm happy with these, like I was happy with the name in there, Fenner looked good, that looked good, these look good. I'm just going to go and I'm going to set those all in place. So I'm going to highlight everything, Control H. You could Control A to highlight everything as well. And now when I click on it, everything is all as one. If I hit my Alt S button, I can see how that cutout's going to be looking. And it's coming along nicely here. Something else I might want to include in my project here is some holes so that the customer can mount this sign on. So again, I'm going to use my grid spacing for this one. So there's too many there. I'm just going to knock this down. I don't. This is just trial and error here because I don't know how big that is. Space is. So let's just go to a 2-inch spacing. See what that gives me. And that's not going to work out real good. So I need an odd number here. So let's just go to 1. Oh no, that's 3 apart, sorry. That's not going to be good for me either. What I want to do, because what I'm trying to do right now is I want my circle to be centered in between these right here. Okay, so ideally what I want to see is I want to see a grid line that's going to come right here in the middle of this and go right down. So this is 3, because it's 1 inch by 1 inch, I know that this is 3 inches across here. So I'm just going to go half of that, and that way I'm going to have a line right down the middle. So my grid spacing now is going to be 1.5 and a 1.5. There we go. So this should do the trick now. So I'm going to move this so that it is snapping to a corner up here. There we go. So now you can see the center of this area right here is going to be right on that spot. So I'm going to add a circle to that so we can cut a hole in it. I'm going to shut my snap off so I can make a circle just any random size. And let's say we want to go with a 1/2 inch hole. I'm going to want to go 0.25 then. That'll be 1/4 inch, which will give me overall a 1/2 inch hole. There it is. And now we have that snap point to put that right in that position. So I'm going to duplicate that hole, and I'm going to drag it way over here. First I'm going to change the size of it apparently. We don't want to do that. It is much easier on the master version where I can just copy and I can paste. I can take things from there and put them wherever I want really quick and easy, but this is okay too. Alright, so we got one there. Let's grab that again. Let's throw it down over here. So when we look over here, we can see we don't have that same, it's not going to work as nice. So what we're going to do is we're going to lock those 2 holes in position just by selecting them. Control H, so we have a path. Now you'll see those holes are part of it. And I'm going to take this object and I'm going to snap it to a bottom corner now. There you go. So with a snap at that bottom corner, I can take this and I can move that to an equal spacing as what I did at the top as well. And I'm going to duplicate that and put another one over at this end. Right in there. There we go. So I'd highlight it all again. Control A, Control H to make a path. There's our sign. So now this thing is getting really close to being ready for cutting. I'm going to leave it at that for this video. Next video, what we're going to look at is welding in all the parts that are going to fall out, and then all we have to do is make a tool path, and this thing is a reality. Alright, I hope that helps and helps you get things arranged and figured out on your projects. Remember, make paths as you go, break them when you need to. So if you needed to adjust that Fellner part, you've got everything else in position already. You could just take it, Control J it, which would loosen everything, and now we could go ahead and we could adjust Fran and Mike Fellner, because the customer didn't like that. They wanted it higher up, and you could mess around with that. Meanwhile, everything else stays exactly where it wants, and then just make that path again. That's my biggest tip for when you're doing arrangements. Okay, hope that helps. Have yourselves a great day, and I'll see you in our next video. Take care. Bye-bye now.